Hi, my name is Kent Lee and I teach computer science at Luther College. In this lesson we're going to learn about how to organize our code into what are called classes and create objects from those classes. So to start this session we're going to go back to the terminal. If you're on a Windows system you'll want to go to the Git program group, and then under the Git program group you'll want to open up the Git bash shell. Once you have that open, or in the terminal window that we have here on a Mac, we're going to type cd, and then we're going to cd into documents, and then we're going to cd into programming again, and cd into Frogger. And then to get things set up for lesson 4, we're going to do a git checkout -f, and then we're going to do lesson 4. And then we'll get that set up. And then we're also going to start up Wing at this point. We can get that off of Wing 101, off of the dock there. And it should probably bring up right away the code. This is the code that we wrote last time. I'm going to make it a little wider here so we can see everything without anything wrapping around. We can also see a lot more on the screen if we close any of these extra windows, and you can collapse them down just by clicking on the tab that's highlighted. So I can see quite a bit of the code here if I just do that. So I have some functions here that I've defined, including a main function. And I want to take a look here at draw a square, for example, and draw a polygon, and see that there's quite a bit of information here about a square. I've got its XY location, I've got its side length, I've got its color, fill color. For draw a polygon, I've got the additional number of sides for it. But all of this information is related to one another. They all have to do with drawing the polygon that's going to be drawn, and the turtle is needed just to be able to draw the polygon. So all of this information is related, and it would be nice if we could just keep all of that information together in our code instead of having to manage all those pieces individually each time we're going to call the function to draw something, or down here to draw some polygons. So to organize our code a little bit more, we're going to create what's called a class, and I'm going to do that with the square up here. I'm going to create what's called a class, and we're going to create a square class in this case. So I write class square, and that defines a new type for Python called a square, so that we're going to be able to create objects of type square. With every class, we're going to write an init function, def init, and self is going to be the reference that points at a square. So self is going to point at a square, or refer to a square object. We're going to see how this works in a moment. And then on the init function, we're going to pass in all the rest of this information that we have here that has to do with a square. So I'm just going to copy and paste it in there. And that's part of the init function now for the square. Now, what I do is I am going to put into the object, which is called self, I'm going to put all this information. And I write a dot because if I put a dot after self, it is going to store something in the object. In this case, I'm going to store an x in the object, and I'm going to let that be equal to the x that I am being passed in as a parameter. We'll see how this works in a moment. But for all the rest of these, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. Self.y equals y, self.sidelength equals side length, and self.fillColor equals fill color. So by doing that, I've put several pieces of information in the object. The only thing I haven't put in there right now is the actual turtle as part of this. I'm going to define one more function as a part of this square, and it's going to be called the draw function. And will have self as well as a parameter to it, but we'll add the turtle as another parameter. Okay, so all of this code that I have down here for draw a square is now going to end up inside of the draw for square. And I see that my indentation got messed up a little bit when I pasted it in. Fix that up by highlighting it and doing a shift tab to move it over. And we get everything lined up the way it should be lined up then. So now I want to look here and say, okay, well, there's an x right there, and x is not defined in this draw. And we saw that if it's not defined or passed in as a parameter, that there's a problem. So we would have a problem with this code, except that self is passed as a parameter, and self has x inside of it. So rather than writing just x, I'm going to write self.x here. And rather than writing y, it's self.y. Same thing with all the others, self.fillColor, self.sideLength, and the rest of it is okay there. Okay. Now I didn't put self dot in front of the turtle because turtle's passed in as an extra, as an argument there. Okay, so I'm going to use this square down below now. Instead of just calling draw square, as I've done in these two lines, I'm going to go ahead and create a square object. So I'm just going to call this SQ, and we'll create a square object by writing the square type. So in this case, square is the type of all square objects. And I'm going to pass into that all the information except for self. So I'm going to do x, y, side length, and fill color. They were all specified right above here, so I'm just going to do the same thing. X, y, side length, 100, and fill color red in this case. So that creates a square object here. So this is creating an object using the square class, and the square class up here is the definition for that object. Now one thing I want to note here is when I write this, I am actually going to go to the square class and execute this code up here. I'm going to set a breakpoint so we can watch this and see what happens. It's probably worthwhile at this point. Okay, so I'm sitting here at this breakpoint, and I'm going to go in and step into this code so I can watch it be executed. So as soon as I step into this code, I jump up here to init. So when I create a square object, I start executing the init code for the square class. Okay, and I told you that self is going to point at the current object. So there's self right there. And we're going to get some indented inside of this is all the things that are a part of self. And we're going to see that we add some things to that. So I'll make that a little bigger here and we can just watch it. So I just added x. X is inside of self and it has a 0. Okay, and I did that because of self.x equals x. So I'm about to add y here. I'm going to click step over, and I've added y to the object. Okay. Now I add side length to the object. There's the 100. And then I add fill color to the object. That was the next line. Now I came out of it already. I came out of that code, but I still have all of that information. It's just not pointed to by self anymore. What happened is when I returned from init, I returned that self, and SQ is set equal to it. So SQ is that object now. We can look here. There's the fill color, there's the side length, there's the x, and there's the y, and they're all a part of SQ. So SQ is a square object that has all of this information inside of it. Okay, so to draw that square, I'm just going to write sq.draw, and I'll pass in the turtle to it. So this line of code calls the draw, we say it calls the draw method on the square object, and that means we go up to the square class and we call this code with self pointing at that SQ object's data, and turtle being the turtle that we just passed in down below. So we did sq.draw turtle. SQ is going to be self, and the turtle here is the turtle that we have up here. Okay, so let's run this code and see what happens now. I'll turn off that breakpoint and continue from where I left off. And when I look at it here, I'm able to draw that square right there, and everything worked just fine. And there's the other one. Okay, so I want you now to pause the video, and I want you to create a square object that draws a square, a green square, just like this one. I want you to go ahead and create another square object and then draw that square object. So pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you've given us a shot. This is what we need to do to create another square. So we can give it a different name. It wouldn't have to, in this case, have a different name, but we can give it a different name. SQ2 is just fine. And we'll let that be equal to square to create a square object. And we pass in all the information just the same way, minus 300, minus 100, 50, and then green as the color that we want. And then once we've created it, it would be nice to draw it too. So sq2.draw, and we'll pass in the turtle to the draw so that we can have the turtle when we're drawing it there. So there's the green one, or the red one, and then there's the green one, and all the other shapes that we're drawing as part of this as well. Okay, now I think it's time for us to go ahead and create a second class for ourselves. Let's create a triangle class and then use that triangle class to create the triangle object that we see and draw that triangle object. So pause the video here and create a triangle class. Okay, so you've given it a shot. This is what we need to do. If we want a class triangle, we're going to go and we're going to do class triangle the way we did it with square, and we have to write a definite each time for every single class. And this thing that we're going to pass into this one is just the side length. That's the only piece of information in this case. And we'd write self.sidelength as equals that side length that's passed in. Okay? And then we want to write a draw method for this as well. And self is the parameter and turtle is the other parameter. Okay? And this is the code that draws a turtle, draws a triangle. So we'll paste that in, and it looks like all our indentation is okay. So, and side length doesn't come as a parameter anymore, but self does. So we'll get the side length from the object there. Okay, so that's the class triangle being created. Now to use it down below, instead of calling draw triangle, I'm going to go ahead and create a triangle object. So we would say something like try equals triangle. It's got to be with a capital T. Okay, and we have a side length is the only thing, so we'll pass that in. And then we're going to do and I think that was the only piece of information for that. So to draw it, then we do a try.draw. And turtle is the thing that we're going to draw or use to draw it. So, okay, so let's give it a shot, see what it does here. So there's the two squares, and there's our triangle being drawn, and the hexagon is as before, and then the circle is being drawn there with the draw polygon call, and another with the draw polygon. Okay, so we created a triangle class. I would like you to go ahead and do this one more time. Let's create create a polygon class for ourselves as well. So pause the video and go ahead and create a polygon class here and a draw method for it as well. Okay, so we have class polygon. Okay. And a colon, and then we definitely need the definite. That's how I remember that we have a definite. So we got self, all these other parameters that are going to be part of it. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy those there. Colon at the end is what we need. And we have to write self dot x equals x, and self dot y equals y, and self dot side length. Lots of information here. Equals the side length. Okay. Self dot number of sides equals the number of sides. Self dot fill color equals the fill color. Then we're going to have a def draw. We have self being passed in and the turtle. And the draw is going to do everything that draw polygon did. We're going to paste all of that inside of there. It looks like indentation is just fine, except that all of these variables now need to have self dot in front of them so that we can get them out of the object. So self dot, looks like that's another one. This one's another one. I don't put self dot in front of I because I is just a variable I'm creating in here for the loop. So, but any object that comes from, or any data that comes from the object, got to put self dot in front of it. Angle, again, is being created in here. I don't need, that's not coming from the object, so I don't need to write anything extra there. So that's the polygon class. To use the polygon class, I'm going to go ahead and comment out these two lines here, and we want to create polygon objects. So we'll just do P1 is equal to polygon, and we're going to pass in all the same information there. So there's one polygon. P2 is the other polygon. Polygon, not polyon. And we'll pass in all of the information other than the turtle into it as well. And now I can say P1.draw, and I'll just pass in the turtle, and P2.draw and pass in the turtle to it as well. Notice I created both in this case and drew them later, and that is perfectly fine to do. So there's our squares with our square class. There's our triangle. The hexagon still isn't a class, but the circle there is now an object, a circle object being created, and then there's another polygon object being created. So we've learned about classes and objects in this, if you want to keep this, I would encourage you to play with it a little bit. Write a hexagon class for yourself and draw on your hexagon object that you create to see if you've got these ideas down. And then I would save this code someplace else if you want to keep it, because it's likely to be overwritten in future lessons. So have some fun with it, and then we'll be ready to start the next lesson.